City Council study session for January 14th is called to order. Would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Again, welcome everyone. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Councilmember Adler?
Present.
Councilmember Johnson?
Excused.
Deputy Mayor King?
Present.
Councilmember Gilliam?
Present.
Councilmember Whitting?
I am here.
Councilmember Dorr?
Excused.
Mayor Kastema?
Present. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as written?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, good. Moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
thank you. A little delay there in our, I think, video, but thank you. Let's move on to, we have just one item on tonight's agenda, and it's 1A, Puyallup 2044 Draft Future Land Use Map. And we have our planning manager, Katie Baker, who will give us a presentation. Please, Katie, mic's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor Kastema, members of council, Katie Baker, planning manager. So as the mayor introduced tonight, I will be presenting to you on the Planning Commission recommended future land use map. This is the land use designation map component of the comprehensive plan update. This is in advance of the public hearing that will be in a couple of weeks. And the intent of the presentation tonight is to really dig into the key changes to the future land use map that are being recommended. At the end of the presentation, I'll go over next steps, which include the upcoming public hearing on the entirety of the comp plan. That's coming up on January 28th. I'm happy to take questions throughout. It'll be a fairly, we'll have a lot of maps to go through, so feel free to stop and ask questions throughout.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So just as an update as to where we are on the timeline for comp plan adoption, we are finally at the end. It feels like it's been a long time getting here, but we're at the final EIS stage and the final comprehensive plan stage. And so tonight's focus will be specifically on the map amendments. So as we've noted in previous presentations on the land use map, these changes were informed by community outreach and work from our community advisory group, our planning commission, and you, the city council. At the start of this process, we developed two alternatives for study in the EIS. Both of these alternatives met our housing and growth targets, but took different approaches. One was a more focused approach that planned for growth mostly in our regional growth centers. The other was a more dispersed approach, still with significant growth in the growth centers, but also growth occurring in small neighborhood nodes spread throughout the city. This proposed map is a hybrid of those two approaches and includes some small-scale neighborhood-serving commercial nodes, more mixed-use opportunities in key areas like the Shaw Pioneer intersection and the South Meridian corridor, and the majority of growth in our regional growth centers. So the map on the left here is what we presented to you back in September. At that point, we were really kind of honing in on the final draft map. And so we had presented to the council to give you kind of an overview of what those proposed changes would be. The Planning Commission recommended map is the map on the right, and that's largely consistent with that earlier version with a few amendments that I'll address in later slides. The biggest change visually, you can see there's some differences there, and it's that the parcel colors and the identification of those changes have actually been made to reflect the newly proposed designations.
So just for me to clarify here, so everything that is outlined in black, am I correct, are things that have been changed?
That's correct.
And then you'll go into the changes?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Yep. So first I want to cover just some kind of general designation changes that we made that do affect a more broad swath of the map. These aren't necessarily things that are outlined. They're more name changes. So auto-oriented commercial was renamed as general commercial. This just reflects less of a vehicle dependency focus on those uses and more general purpose commercial uses in that designation. Our limited commercial designation that had, I think, 2 or 3 different zoning designations within that has been renamed neighborhood commercial. That's been a big focus of both policy and land use changes in this update. And so we've kind of repurposed an existing designation with a new name to primarily focus on neighborhood serving commercial uses with some small scale mixed use development. So these examples on the screen are just examples. These name changes occur with these designations across the city. A couple of other name changes and merges. We previously had 2 different kind of industrial related designations, business park or business industrial park and light manufacturing and warehousing. The land use designation for these has been combined and renamed as mixed employment. I want to note that we still intend to have 2 separate zoning designations to address the differences in these areas. But that's the yellow highlighted parcels are an example of those designation name changes. And then another change that we've proposed is redesignating all existing properties with public facilities land use, removing that public facilities land use designation, but retaining it as a zoning designation only. So on the land use map, you'll see a lot of changes that might be public schools. The ones I've circled here include Pierce College, Sunrise Elementary, and the city's corporate yards parcels. So those have all been changed on the land use map to have a designation that's similar to adjacent parcels. But just know that on the zoning map, we will retain that public facilities designation for the purpose of clear identification and regulation. In addition to changing the LC land use designation to neighborhood commercial, we have newly applied that NC designation in certain key locations, primarily along West Stewart and West Pioneer. It's been predominantly applied to existing commercial properties to address non-conforming uses and allow for redevelopment over time. So you can kind of see there's little nodes there. It might be 1 or 2 parcels in one area. There is a larger swath of parcels. And it's really to allow for that small scale kind of, your corner store, your coffee shop, a small restaurant, maybe a bookstore or something like that someday. So to allow those little neighborhood serving uses where we have a lot of adjacent residential. We heard from the community a desire to enhance the opportunities in the Shaw Pioneer area. So we have a few changes proposed in the vicinity of that major intersection. This is a change in land use designation to mixed use commercial, which is more consistent with the existing zoning designation and allows for consideration of a potentially a higher intensity zoning, mixed use zoning in the future. So this is kind of that dark red, those dark red parcels. So again, the zoning probably won't change, or if it changes, it'll stay generally the same with maybe a little more intensity. But the land use designation is more clear that it's mixed use in that area. So it does allow for a mix of commercial and housing, not just commercial alone. The council has expressed...
Katie, if you
yes.
could reverse, go to that
Sure.
previous slide.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the Shaw Road, I see.
Yes.
I know that there had been requests in that area for multifamily housing, but also for businesses that don't require a lot of retail access. Is that what was taken into account in that zoning?
So this zoning would be primarily residential and commercial, retail, maybe some office. So not necessarily anything more intensive than that.
Not light industrial or anything?
No, not as a part of this land use designation. That would have to be some type of alternate land use designation or some other form.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, so then this is the South Meridian corridor. We heard council actually has expressed support for quite a while for maybe looking at some alternatives along this corridor. This is obviously a critical transportation corridor in our city. It connects our two regional growth centers. It's adjacent to the hospital, which is kind of its own little unofficial center. There's potential high-capacity transit along this corridor. So what we've proposed in these different mixed-use commercial nodes is, in most cases, they're going from multifamily to mixed use. So it's kind of adding a commercial component as an allowed use on top of multifamily housing that's already there. The reason that we've left a lot of the surrounding parcels multifamily only is that they're already built out with fairly large, well-established apartment complexes, and it just made the most sense to leave those as a conforming use in that multifamily designation.
Question there. I see you have the medical zone in blue.
Yes.
Yet along Meridian, I see plenty of clinics and doctors' offices, those types of things. Would it be advisable for us, or is that included in this zoning, that they could in fact have a medical facility?
Yeah, so the medical offices, if they're just, not a large hospital, but certainly clinics and office use is allowed in that mixed use zone, any commercial zone. Okay. So it already facilitates that type of use.
Okay, thank you.
So these are two clips from our regional growth centers, downtown on the upper right and South Hill in the lower image. No major land use changes are proposed here, just a few minor ones. In downtown, we've changed some low-density residential designation to moderate density, kind of at the periphery of, sorry, that mouse isn't working very well, the periphery of that growth center. And then in South Hill, the previous limited commercial designation has been changed to mixed use. So that supports a higher intensity of development that we felt is more appropriate for that growth center.
Okay, thank you. Pardon me for a question. Councilmember Gilliam.
Thank you, Mayor Castema. Katie, could you give me a breakdown of what low density, medium density, and high density would mean?
Absolutely. So low density residential includes currently 4 primarily single family residential zoning designations. So if you, anything you see on the map that's yellow, and if I was showing a picture of the whole city, you would see that really a large majority of the city has that yellow designation, and that's our low density. So that could be a variety of single family zoning designations. Moderate density residential is fairly sparsely used in the city, or has been at least. We're actually using that a little bit more with some of these changes, and that is that facilitates like duplexes to townhome style developments. If you're familiar with the Robbins Hollow neighborhood up off of 23rd and Meridian, that's an example of moderate density residential. So not an apartment complex, but something a little more dense than just a single family neighborhood. And then high density residential is kind of what you see along going up Meridian or out on East Main. It usually facilitates larger apartment complexes or kind of periphery downtown multifamily zoning would be high density as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Councilmember Whitting.
You know, as we get into our regional growth centers, first off, let me just position things a little bit. Between now and 2044, we're supposed to accommodate another 7,482 housing units on top of the 18,000 we've got now. So that's a pretty substantial increase. And as we look at these downtown neighborhood plan, I note that our housing units within the downtown neighborhood plan is going to go from 690 up to 2798, so a fourfold increase. And I look out over the city, and I'm a little curious as to how that's going to happen. You know, it doesn't seem like the kind of you know, tweaking some things from low density to medium density is really going to accomplish our objectives there. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I would say that's generally correct, that we are still planning for a lot of the growth in the regional growth centers. So kind of making these smaller changes from low density to moderate density in other areas of the city. You know, that will just be a small addition to the to facilitate those housing units. We do, in addition to these map changes, we do anticipate, you know, the next few months, the next probably few years in reality, will be spent making amendments to our code, particularly in the two regional growth centers, to make sure we're removing any barriers so that the zoning that's in place can actually facilitate and you know, developers can actually propose and build housing that helps us meet those targets. I will say too, those are growth targets. Obviously, we recognize that the city doesn't build that housing. We need to make sure that the structure is in place to allow for housing to be constructed and to make that feasible. But and we will need to show that we're making progress to accommodating those housing units, but I wouldn't say it's a guarantee that we're going to actually see those kinds of numbers by 2044.
So just thinking about how we go about encouraging, you know, obviously we need more housing. Housing prices are going up. It's getting less and less affordable. We need more affordable housing for young families that would not otherwise be able to afford it. So I'm and in order to do that, you know, we don't do that. Those of us sitting here at the dais don't do that. It's our development community that has to do that. So are we trying to make things as flexible as, you know, we want to have some say in what happens within our city, but we don't know what pencils out for our developers. So I hope we're considering adding as much flexibility as we go along, so that those, so you know, a particular plot may not fit our code perfectly, but if we, you know, give it a little more flexibility, it could accommodate what the developer can pencil out, as opposed to what might not happen if we don't have that flexibility. So I know I'm probably jumping the gun here a little bit. We're in the land use and the comp plan portion and not the code portion, but as we get into that, you know, my personal objective is to try and make our things a little bit easier and quicker for our development community, so that we can bring more housing online sooner and really supply the needs of our community. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate that comment. Certainly, you're correct that really is more of a code issue than kind of a land use issue at this point. But you know, we heard your comments in our presentation last week when we kind of presented on the DPS department, and I think we heard some of those same comments. So we're certainly taking that into account. That as a council, you seem to be supportive of more flexibility, and we'll be bringing you, you know, more specifics. Topic areas and areas of the code where we could open that up for flexibility to hear from you all, you know, as to kind of which direction you prefer us to go with those choices.
Yeah, and you know, just changing track here a little bit. You know, I sit down with the housing action plan periodically and go through the many objectives that are embedded in that document, and it doesn't seem like we're moving ahead on as many of those as I'd like to, and I was hoping that as we went through this comprehensive plan, that a bunch of that stuff would dump out and we'd make one small step for man and one great leap for Puyallup. And I don't feel like we're getting there yet. So I'm hopeful that as we get into this code building process that we can really make that happen.
Absolutely. So just going over a few other topical areas and changes to the land use map. One is, we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but some small changes to certain key areas regarding residential designations. So this would take our moderate density residential in a few key areas here that really is more aligned with what is existing on those parcels. So some of those parcels have duplexes, fourplexes, and really by going from low density to moderate density, it will make those conforming uses. And then I actually realized I highlighted the wrong area here. That's Puyallup High School, but there's an area just to the south of that along 5th Street, southwest, that also went from low density to moderate density residential. And it really is kind of that transition area between lower density to the west and the downtown area to the east. A few other residential changes are recommended at the intersection of Fruitland and 31st. This is an area we heard from the community that they might want to see increased density, even a little neighborhood commercial. We felt just with the kind of utility capacity and infrastructure of that area, a small shift to moderate density residential first might help kind of shift that to more of a neighborhood node. And we could consider some neighborhood commercial there in the future. And then south of East Pioneer, this is kind of in the vicinity of the Shaw Pioneer intersection. This area has also been designated for high density residential and actually some moderate density residential to the west.
Katie,
Yes.
could I request, because I am asking all members to review these maps, that I assume there is a definitional sheet out there for these zones?
Yes.
I would ask that be disseminated to all council members so they can see and maybe even include an example. If you say so many units, for example, triplex, duplex, whatever the case may be, multi-story, multifamily, along that lines, that would be very helpful because I do want the proposed map to go to everyone, but I want them to be able to analyze these changes and talk to the neighbors, see what they think about it. Anyway, proceed.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. We can certainly provide that. So just a couple private requests that we wanted to highlight. So we had opened up an opportunity earlier last year, to allow anyone in the city, any property owner, to suggest particular changes that we should study. And a few of those were proposed and recommended by the Planning Commission. So this first one is a conversion of a rural buffer residential designation to mixed-use commercial, which is in keeping with those properties immediately to the east. And the second one on this map is it's a handful of parcels that are commonly owned by one property owner. And this is a change from low density to high density residential. Along with those surrounding properties, many of them are undeveloped or maybe just have one home on a large parcel. And so this also would facilitate future redevelopment in an area that is shifting to a little more density and activity.
Just to note, that is currently more or less a field, am I correct? There's not many...
Right, there are a couple homes there, but a lot of vacant parcels too, I believe.
So you would go from that to high density?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The Washington State Fair also submitted a request to redesignate their properties that they own outside of the fairgrounds boundary. These properties currently have a mix of low density, high density, and commercial designations, but they are fair owned, so they requested to be redesignated to the fair land use designation. So I don't know if you all are aware, but we have a fair land use designation and a fair zoning designation. And we've discovered through this process that they're applied a bit inconsistently. Not surprising, but so the fair brought it to our attention, the parcels that are under their ownership, and have requested a redesignation to that fair designation.
Excuse me, what does fair designation mean?
So, in terms of looking at the land use map, it's really a way to easily identify the properties the fair owns. The fair zoning designation does give them certain allowances that no other designation in our city would allow. So the fair property itself is zoned fair, and that's how they have, a roller coaster and large buildings and things like that. Certainly that's not what we would expect or desire outside of the fairgrounds boundaries, and that's something that came up through the Planning Commission process, kind of concerns with what the zoning designation allows and whether that's appropriate outside the main boundaries of the fair. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but since you've brought it up, I'm going to share that the Planning Commission actually recommended that these properties not get redesignated at this time, that we first work on zoning code amendments to be more specific in the zoning code as to what's allowed within the fair boundaries and kind of what permissions are allowed on fair-owned properties outside the main fairgrounds. So that is something that that was discussed quite extensively. The Planning Commission also would like to see the fair go through a master plan process, which is not currently something that the code allows for, the way it does for, or requires actually, for like the hospital or the colleges in the city, those bigger institutional uses. The fair doesn't have that same requirement or privilege to go through a master plan.
So is the fear by the part of the Planning Commission that, we're talking worst case scenario, that someone puts a Ferris wheel right on that location? Technically, you're saying that would be permissible?
Technically, as a use, it would be permissible. I think what they were more concerned with, there are things like additional parking impacts or allowances within, I think, a certain number of feet, 2,000 feet of fair zoned properties. So by extending the zoning designation further beyond the fairgrounds, it extends other allowances, and it has kind of a ripple effect. And those were some of the main concerns the Planning Commission brought up, and why they recommended making zoning code changes first. I will say, just from kind of a timing and sequencing standpoint, we've kind of talked about this among our staff and still feel that council could move forward with the land use designations at this time. We feel, the fair is working with us in good faith to address some of these zoning issues, and those code amendments would be high on our list of ones to work on and to bring forward to you, along with some others that we'll be working on.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Whitting.
Just a quick question. We've got the fair's planning to have a festival street there on 9th. So, that parking, what's those vacant lots that are used for parking just north of 9th there, if they decided they wanted to put in small commercial, restaurants, that sort of thing, would that be permissible there?
So right now, most of those properties are zoned multifamily, those ones north of 9th. And so they would only be able to facilitate multifamily as a new use. So the fair can continue to use those as parking lots because that's the use that has been established. But if a new use were proposed, restaurant or commercial would actually not be permitted there.
Yeah, so I haven't talked to the fair lately to know what their plans are, but you know, having a festival street there, it kind of increases the vibrancy if there's stuff going on both sides of the street, and I'm curious as to what's going to happen there, and what the next page in that, and I doubt it's going to be multifamily.
Actually, I believe we may have someone here this evening that might enlighten us on that. But otherwise, you're right. It requires investigation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I just have a couple more slides.
Councilmember Adler.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Katie, could you go back one, please? I just want to be sure that I'm understanding correctly. So this is a private request from the fair to change the land use and or zoning designations of the properties under the fair's ownership to fair designation. And so looking at this image, the map, that means that, or am I correct, that all of the parcels that are outlined in green are owned by the fair?
Yes, I do need to make one correction or clarification. There are 5 parcels here in purple, which is the fair. Those are not fair-owned parcels. They are privately owned individually. So part of the fair's request was actually to undesignate that, go from fair to low-density residential. The Planning Commission did support that portion of the request. But you're correct that everything else in green and yellow, green around this kind of orange color, and a couple other spots, those are all fair-owned parcels.
And currently they're zoned just residential?
In most cases.
Okay.
It's a variety, but yes, mostly residential.
Thank you.
Okay.
Proceed.
So just a couple of final items on the Planning Commission recommendation. By and large, the Planning Commission recommended a land use map that was consistent with kind of the draft map that we released, that we showed you back in September and we released to the public later that fall. There were just a couple of other changes I wanted to mention. The South Hill Business and Technology Center had originally, they indicated to us, we had a couple meetings, and they submitted a comment letter on the EIS to convert a portion of their property from this mixed employment designation, they're a business park zoning designation, to a mixed use. They're kind of exploring other development opportunities and wanted to have some mixed use allowances. So we originally proposed kind of a split down the center of their site. After some more conversation with them and refinement, that's been modified to just be really about the first 300 feet of their site from 39th. The vast majority of the rest of the site would remain in this kind of business park designation. And so we've continued to have clarifying conversations with them, and we're recommending a slight modification from the Planning Commission recommendation, but it's essentially what you see on the screen. It'll just line up with some parcels that are a little hidden there right now. And then the last one I wanted to mention is this area adjacent to the hospital and the medical zoning, around basically between 15th Avenue and 23rd Avenue Southeast. This was initiated based on a specific private request as well as a general desire to allow more housing options near the hospital. And this area, within the blue outline, but the area in yellow, was originally proposed to be changed to moderate density residential from a low density designation. However, in response to many comments from residents in the area, The commission has recommended maintaining the low-density residential designation, and staff supports that recommendation.
Excuse me, Katie. Councilmember Whitting, I'm sorry. Did you have a question? Are you okay? All right, please proceed.
So then my last slide, I've already touched on it. It was just more specifics about the fair. So this, the 5 parcels that are circled are what the Planning Commission did recommend, which takes it from fair designation to a low density residential, since those are privately owned. And then again, those are the remainder of the fair proposals. And we are presenting it to council for your consideration to make that land use change now. So, I do have one more slide on next steps. So as I mentioned, January 28th, 2 weeks from now, we'll be back before you with a City Council public hearing on the entirety of the comprehensive plan, and that will include all of these map amendments. We're anticipating in February completing the final and issuing the final environmental impact statement, and then over February and March, working with you all to move towards adoption of the comprehensive plan. So with that, I have other more the map images that were in your packet. I do have those as slides, so if you have questions about anything, I can pull those up. I'm happy to answer any. I didn't show you the whole city, so any questions that you have, please do ask, and that's what we're here for tonight.
All right. Any questions from council members? Councilmember Whitting.
Sorry I'm chatty tonight. I had brought up the area just north of 512, south of 31st, that corridor that runs from South Hill Mall out to Fruitland, as a possible area where, it seemed like it's close into transit. It's got some pretty large vacant parcels out there and those will be developed as single family homes at some point. And I just think that there's an opportunity currently to go with a little higher density in that area. I hate to disturb existing neighborhoods, but that's an area out there where there aren't neighborhoods yet, and we have the opportunity to create new neighborhoods that are aligned with the kind of densities that we're looking for, and it's again pretty close to transit. So I just, that area appeals to me for a higher density designation. So I wanted to mention that again. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is we've in our housing allocations from PSRC and PCRC, obviously those things are designated by affordability income level, and there's looking at what they're asking us to do, there's a whole heck of a lot of really low, less than 30% of average medium income, over 2,000 units of that. So that would be something in the neighborhood of 25% of our total new housing, and we can't do that. The private sector cannot do that. There has to be subsidies. So has there been any discussion about trying to meet those targets, or are we forging ahead with what our what the market can deliver?
Yeah, that's been certainly a challenging topic to kind of figure out and understand how those units will be accommodated in the city. What I can say is the first step is getting the land use designations and then the zoning designations in place, so that the zoning can at least facilitate that type of housing that is typically constructed that meets that income level. So you generally don't see that kind of subsidized housing in a mixed use development. You typically see that in kind of your general high-density residential designations. So we're making sure that kind of zoning is in place that allows and can accommodate for that. Beyond that, there are zoning incentives that could be considered, or kind of a zoning structure in place, as well as partnerships between the city and affordable housing providers. So those are all steps that we'll need to take and to talk with council about as that moves forward.
Yeah, that's a tough area for me, and I'm not crazy about what's being pushed at us in that regard. I'm a big proponent of attainable housing, but trying to come up with housing that's sub 30% of AMI is, and how do you maintain that affordability? So I will be interested in further discussions of that later on, and I think as a council we I don't have a vision of how that gets done and how much effort we want to put behind it. Quite frankly, it's I think the objective should be to help people raise their income, not dumb down our housing to that level. So and then subsidize it. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor King.
Hi there. Thank you, Mayor Castema. Just a quick question. I apologize. My internet is subpar at best where I'm at right now, and so I apologize. I just wanted to clarify Councilmember Whitting's comment. Was his comment about high-density housing in the southwest sector?
Correct.
Deputy Mayor, yeah, I'll let him clarify that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the southwest sector, so again, just north of 512 and south of 31st, which 31st is the street that runs right across the north end of South Hill Mall.
Yeah, no, I'm very familiar with that area. The only concern I have are a couple things. One, that is, I believe, a critical area due to a lot of wetlands that are in that vicinity. I don't know if high-density housing would be something that would fit well in that area just because of it being a critical area due to the wetland situation. You have Clark's Creek that runs through there. Also, I don't believe that there's going to be much infrastructure to sustain high-density housing in that area. That's just my opinion, and from the information that I've gathered. But two things that kind of raise a red flag for me on that is the critical area for wetlands and the infrastructure that's not in place for high density. I think that high density should focus more in our downtown core, and then from there spread out to townhomes, and then single family residential past that. But this area in particular, I am concerned about just because of the wetlands buffers that are very prominent in this area due to the creek. And I just don't know if we have the infrastructure in place to be able to sustain a high density housing projects in that area. Thank you.
Yeah, just let me clarify a little bit. I'm saying higher density, not necessarily high density. So there are some developments in there. Out towards Fruitland, there's a little community of duplexes in there. I think it's a really nice little community, little kind of an L-shaped development. More of that sort of thing. But
so you're not talking like 5-story buildings.
I'm
right?
not talking 5-story things. The garden apartments, the missing middle kinds of things further out, maybe a little bit of the high density towards the east end, but there isn't an awful lot of developable land in there, but so maybe just a tiny bit there, but more dense. Some of the zoning out there is RS 35, and so that's a lot of space. I'd love to. I think we need to zone that down so the lot size can be a lot smaller than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Adler.
Thank you. Just real quickly, Katie, I would appreciate it greatly if I could get the fair designation definition and some history on that. It would be super helpful to me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Again, if we could get, a glossary, so to speak, that would be very helpful.
Yes.
If there are no further questions, we're going to move on to citizens' comments. And citizen comments at study sessions are limited to 2 minutes, and they must address the issue we are discussing. We're talking about the comprehensive plan, so I would say any one of your comments that are germane to that would certainly be appropriate. Could we have the clerk please provide instructions for public comments?
Yes, sir. This time is reserved for a public comment on tonight's agenda topics only. The mayor will call on those who have provided their names in advance. Then the mayor will call for other citizens who wish to speak. For the record, please state your name and address or city council district in which you reside. Please direct your comments to the council as a whole, not individual council members. All comments are limited to 2 minutes. The clerk will provide verbal notice when only 30 seconds remain. As a reminder, this portion of the meeting is council's opportunity to hear from the community and not a time to engage in debate. Lastly, per state law, this public comment period cannot be used to speak in support of or in opposition to a ballot measure or individual candidacy, and no such comments will be allowed.
Thank you. Keep in mind that I have 2 people who have filled out a form. I see another one coming. That basically places you in queue and order. But when I am through with everyone who's given me a form, I will gladly give other people the opportunity to come forward and speak. Just state who you are, your address, that would be appropriate, or which district you're from will also suffice. So, and I don't mean to be rude when you hit the 2 minutes, but I do have to, regardless of what you're saying, whether you're saying, whatever the case may be, I have to cut people off at 2 just to make sure that I'm treating everyone equally. So with that in mind, the first person to sign up is Paul Romich.
Thank you, Mayor Castma. Paul Romich, District 1. I'm sure y'all have heard the news that Macy's is leaving the South Hill Mall at this point. And that's a loss to the city, right? It's a big footprint to fill, not just, physical location, but also sales tax dollars, right? I don't know how well they were doing from a sales tax perspective, but, that money needs to be made up somehow, right? For city services and whatnot. And with how we've funded some of our more recent investments in the city, such as our public safety building and our roadways, those have been through tax increases, right? That's not incredibly sustainable, long term. So we need to look at our land use map to see how can we make our land more productive, right? And so tying back Macy's, what makes things more productive is more stuff like our downtown, right? Where we have small businesses who are highly participative in our community, funding events, or sponsoring events, just they're here to weather the storm with us, right? And footprints like what Macy's has an anchor store in the mall, there's not many businesses that can, fill those shoes, right? So by
30 seconds.
We have to cater how our city code works to enable more of the small businesses and local wealth development rather than companies who are going to come in, take what they can, and then leave. So, and that starts with the future land use map. So things like our, commercial nodes and mixed use development, those are where we start with by doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Doc Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I hate these things because I don't want to look at myself. So if I go away here, it's because these things are getting in my way. I want to thank the staff for doing this. It's allowing for a lot of comment. However, I'd like to bring to attention, being in the planning profession for 43 years, the way we used to do comprehensive planning is we had categories, a number of categories which exist, and then we took the codes, primarily the zoning codes, to fill into those classifications. A lot of those classifications had more than one. They had sometimes 3 or 4 zones within each of the classifications. And I intend to make some comments. You'll notice that I put some comments on maps that I intend to turn in so that the council can see those and actually make comments on the policies in relation to that. And I know that 3 minutes isn't enough time to do all of those. That's why I'm putting them in writing. But again, I would like you to keep in mind that the comprehensive plan that's before you right now are designations for 2044. That does not mean that you have to have those zones put in place at the time you complete the comprehensive plan. You can do the zoning later because you have a docket process which can change the zones, and you have a 5-year
30 seconds
to improve and amend your existing comprehensive plan. Please keep that in mind, because some of the changes I'm suggesting allows for higher density and lower density, what's indicated as lower density in your comprehensive plan. That's why I'm suggesting the higher density, because it doesn't have to change the zone until the landowner wants to change it. It just allows for it. Please keep that in mind. And I thank you very much, and you're going to hear too much from me.
Thank you. Doc, please realize that if you give me documents, I can go ahead and replicate those and get them to all members. So if you have anything right now you want to hand to me, it is public record too. You have to be aware of that. But I will gladly make sure every member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, because I was going to ask what the best way to, and that's what I will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dave Kimberly, or I'm sorry, is it Kimberling? Kimberling, yeah. I see. Okay, thank you.
Dave Kimberling, live over in Orchard Hills, just off of Fruitland.
Yes.
A little bit of question first. I'm not sure this fits perfectly. Fruitland, we have a traffic issue there in front of Fruitland Elementary. Is that okay to bring it in this context, given that it's a zoning, it's a little bit more of a zoning discussion?
Well, I'll allow it. It came up last time, and I don't know if our police chief is still here. I think he had to go for an emergency, or is he available? Tell you what, that will, no, I'm taking your time up. If we could stop the clock for a second. That came up last time.
Okay.
At our regular council meeting on the 28th, I plan on having the police chief address that at that time.
I thought it was tonight, actually, but okay.
I apologize for that. No. Is that okay?
Yeah, so would you prefer to delay it till then?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you. Okay, with that, are there any other comments? Sir, please come forward. Just state your name and what district you're from, or your address.
So my name's Joshua Hosford. I own Hosford Construction. I'm actually a resident of Buckley, Washington, but I'm one of the developers that is looking at investing in the city of Puyallup. My company is responsible for probably 100 residential lots a year, so we do a decent amount of production. There's a item here in the land use, LU 18.3, that stood out to me when I've read through all this. It says mixed-use developments, including a residential component within pedestrian-oriented commercial areas, should be subject to height, bulk, and building design standards with no density limitations imposed. And so one of the things that I do before I invest in a city and look for projects is, do a deep dive in the code and take a look at it. And one of the things that really stood out to me downtown, for example, and I'm new to this here, so maybe this has been a source of contention in the past, but the density allowances downtown are just not what you would see when you have what the city has, which is a train stop and a huge infrastructure there in that core. That's where you'd see much higher building heights and not these restrictions that you see in density. So I'm hoping that 18.3 becomes a theme in the code adoption as we go through to redo what's currently in the code. And then even if you go to like Shaw Road in that area, which seems to be an area the city's really focused on, you have density limitations in the mixed use zone of like 10 units an acre, 20 units an acre. That's a real challenge, because when you have a 10-acre piece, you're talking about putting 100 units there when you could put 500. And so I just really encourage to look at those types of areas and say, are you missing these opportunities for these real dense projects? And once they get built, they'll never be built again for our lifetimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie, do you mind taking notes on that, and then if we could discuss that further, please.
Thank you. Tom Utterback with Washington State Fair. And 2 minutes won't be enough to do justice to some of the comments. And I can just start by saying we are involved in this process. We will be involved in the public hearing and can provide you whatever information you need and work with staff on that. Katie did a good job of pointing out how the fair brought in a package of amendment requests about a year ago. Most of those actually pertain to zoning. They're just two relatively small parts that were comp plan amendments tonight, one of which is exactly what Councilmember Whitting was talking about, of the narrow strip right along the north side of 9th, where the Festival Drive is going in, where we do see good opportunities for long-term something happening other than just parking lots that are there now, but the zoning doesn't really facilitate that. So that's one of them. The other one is a relatively small area over on the west side of Fairview Drive, where a lot of the property already is designated fairgrounds. Just a couple of quick things. One is that most of these properties have been owned and used by the fair for decades that we're talking about. The other is that the fair really doesn't at this moment have near-term plans to do some major redevelopment. This periodic update just seemed like a very opportune time to take a look at some of these, and we, in talking to staff, knew that there were just some areas of cleanup that were necessary given inconsistencies within that. So that's what we're mostly trying to do here tonight. We do support staff's idea of zoning and map and text working together. We're committed to do that with them in 2025 and with the Planning Commission so that we can allay any concerns before zoning actually. But we do support staff's recommendation that these comp plan designation changes do go forward at this time so that we can work through this whole process. And we will be back at the public hearing, and I know that CEO Renee McLean wants to be here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, would anyone else like to come forward? Please.
David Grote, District 3. Talking tonight about the map changes. I agree with so much of this. I think is a very good document. There are some things that cause me concern. One of these things is the growth rate. Rather than make policy now for growth based on 20-year projections, our best option for reducing negative impacts to neighborhoods is to implement the minimum required density now that can be modified annually and overall in 10 years. Regarding residential business, creeping commercialization of residential neighborhoods would be allowed by promoting small businesses, including commercial nodes, in all residential neighborhoods. We should be careful before allowing such development that we have strict boundaries and conditions for them. Mixed employment. The proposed new mixed employment designation will allow warehousing along 39th Avenue Southeast, potentially increasing heavy truck traffic on already overburdened 39th and Shaw Road. I recommend against employment center designation unless warehouses are left out of it. Exclusions. The Washington Code provides numerous escape clauses that treat property rights differently by location or community interest. I urge the council to find, insofar as possible, density solutions for our city that do not place an undue burden on any one area. Thank you.
Thank you. David, I will say to you what I said to Doc, that if you have written comments that you would like to have dispersed to the members, you just go ahead and give those to me and I will do that, okay? All right? So let's go ahead and open it up one more time. Okay. Katie, thank you for the presentation. And with that, I'm going to announce that we're going to go into executive session, and we don't plan on coming back out and conducting any business, so there's no need for you to stay in the audience. But however, I want to inform you that the council will now recess into executive session to consider the minimum price at which real estate will be offered for sale or lease, to engage in the process of planning or adopting a strategy or position to be taken during the course of any collective bargaining, and to discuss the city attorney's litigation or potential litigation to which the city council, or a council member acting in an official capacity is or is likely to become a party. The executive session is expected to last 1 hour, and again, there's no further action expected to follow executive session, so I would just advise anyone in the audience that there is no reason to be here. We will not come back into the chambers. And with that, I'm going to adjourn to executive session. Thank you.